This is Gemara Metziah Daf Kof Yud Ches Baruch Hashem. An exciting day as we are one daf away. B'siyata Dishmaya from the close, not the close, the pausing point at the end of the Masechta before we move on to the next. And we're holding on the bottom of Kof Yud Zayin Amid Beis, and we'll make mention. Everyone has to check out the Zichru method, starting with Baba Basra. Maybe we'll even try to post some Zichru Shirim, absolutely phenomenal. Commemorate points of every daf without 5 extra minutes a day. They have an app, they have a website. Check it out. Again, I'm going to try. I don't know if we're going to do it for right now, but we're going to try to get up small Zichru Shirim, which are simanim, to remember the main points in the daf. But for now, let's go to the bottom of Kuf Yud Zayin Beis, the Mishnah. We have a Mishnah now that we have two different properties, like we have been discussing, each owned by different people, one above another. Says the Mishnah, V'chein Beis Abad Shubanoi Bisela. We have a Beis Abad, an olive press that is built in Iraq. V'gina Achaz Al Gabov. And there's a garden on top of this olive press. V'nivchas, and the roof of this rock area collapses. So now the garden area on top lost its floor, and this Beis Abad on the bottom, this olive press, lost its roof. The balagina is allowed to come down and plant below keeping until the owner of the Beis Abad makes a keepin. A keepin is a roof, a domed area. Rashi says enough of a situation that he could put down dirt and replant his garden. Case number one. Case number two, hakaisel va'ilan shenaflu there shosarabim. A kaisel and an ilan, a wall and a tree that fell into Rishus Harabim, they ziku, and they cause damage. What's the halacha? Pater milishalem, the owner is pater to pay. Nasla zaman lakot. What happens if they told him, the government tells him that, not necessarily the government. If you look at the bottom Rashi, it says Sharua Bezdin Shayanaitiloi. Bezdin sees that his wall is on the verge of collapse, and they give him a time to cut it down. As a Elon, for listeners, a kaisel, or to break his wall, v'nafloi b'toich zemanoi. If it falls within that amount of time, so there's nothing he should have done because he seemingly had the time. But if it was la'achar zmanoi, if it was after the amount of time, meaning they gave him a month and it was after that month, then chayiv, then he's obligated because he should have listened and he should have fixed the wall, took down the tree within the amount of time. Continues the Mishnah, Misha Kaisai Samach, Leginas. The Ginas Chavera. Someone has a wall that's near the garden of his friend. Binafal, and the wall falls. Vamar Loi, and the guy owner of the garden says to him, Pana Avanecha, please clear away your stones. The Amar Loi, and the guy replies, Higi Ucha, they're yours. Keep the stones. As the top Rashi points out, Heim Shalach, they are your stones. Upana Isan Latzmacha, and clear them out yourself. Ein Shaimim Loi, we do not listen to him. Meaning, the owner of the garden does not need to accept the stones. Ein Kain Lo Dvar Hefker Matana, Mishakibul Alav. But if the owner of the garden accepted the stones, Amar Loi, and then afterwards he says, Here are your expenses. Amar Loi, the owner of the wall could say to him, here are your expenses to clear away the stones. And I'll take back my stones, and the opposite. Because now the owner of the garden has accepted the stones, and now they're his. So very good that the owner of the wall now wants to say, oh no, I want them back. It is too late. And finally, someone hires a worker to work with him with straw. And the worker asks him for his wages. V'amar Lai, and the Baal Abaye says, told Masha Asita Bischarcha, take that which you made, take the wheat, and that will be your wages. Ein Shaimim Lai, the worker is not obligated to listen. He's not a demand, he wants cash. But if the worker did accept it, Misha Kibulav, and then V'amar Lai Scharcha V'niyetel Shali, and then the owner wants to say, no, give me back the wheat and I'll pay you. Too late. Ein Shaimim Lai, we do not listen to him. So says the Gemara, let's start with the first case. First case was we have an olive press inside a garden, a rocky area with a garden on top, and the roof falls. Says the Gemara, Nifchisa, how much of the roof falls for the din of the Mishnah to apply? And this is very similar to the case that we had in the previous daf. A machlek is Rav and Shmuel. Rav Amar Beru, but as with the majority of the roof fell, Shmuel Amar, no, Barba, even if only 4 tvachim fell. Explains the Gemara, Rav Amar Beruba, Aval Barba, Dam Zeriach, Chetzev Lemata, Chetzev Lemala. If it's only 4 tvachim, you don't have to let him plant his whole garden below. He'll just bring some stuff down. Shmuel Amar Barba, and Dam Zeriach, Chetzev Lemata, Chetzev Lemala. And therefore, he's allowed to plant everything below. So the obvious question is, this is mamish the exact same discussion that we had back on Kutes Zayin, excuse me. So says the Gemara, Husricha, why do we have to list this case 2 times? Diashmin and Tira, if we said it's about a dwelling, I would have thought, Behakamer Shmuel, that's when Shmuel held his din, that a person doesn't dwell half above and half below. It's not normal for someone to live half in one area and half someone else. With the garden to planting, maybe I would have said, it is a normal way for someone to plant. And therefore, and if we only said this din by the second case of the garden, I would have thought, that's when Rav says that you could, yes, come and plant below. Excuse me, that you don't plant below, you plant a part above, part below. Aval Bahab, maybe in the case of the house, Shmuel, he'd be Moed, that's not a normal way to live, and therefore you could, yes, go live below. Sricha, that's 4. We needed to list both cases. And we continue with the 2 dots, about 15 lines into the Gemara that continues Naslei Zaman that we said in the Mishnah that if Bezdin gives him time to knock down his wall, so if it falls within his time, he's not obligated. But if it falls after the time that Bezdin gave him, then he is. Says the Gemara, V'kama Zaman, how much Zaman Bezdin? Am Rav Yechanan, Shleishim Yom. We continue, Mishaya Kaisla, the Mishnah continue that if someone has a wall next to his friend's garden, says the Gemara, Meitani Seifa, Heilach Yitzioisecha, Mechal Teveninu Askinan. From the fact that the Mishnah said, Heilach Yitzioisecha, fact that he said, here are your expenses, it sounds like we're discussing Tepaninu Askinan, where he already cleared away the stones, meaning it sounds like he offered the owner of the garden his stones. And the owner of the garden agreed. And he already cleared away the stones. And now he's coming and offering to pay him and then take back the stones. Because the case seems that he already did the act of clearing, says the Gemara, Taima de Paninu. It sounds like it's only because you already cleared away the stones. But if you did not, then the owner of the garden cannot necessarily keep them, and the owner of the wall can, yes, demand them back. Ask the Gemara, why is this field not koina for him? So once he showed to the owner of the garden, you could keep the stones, and he wanted to, he should have a kinyan. Answers the Gemara, but in this case, he didn't necessarily have in mind to be mechavein Why? Because he was just pushing him off, that he didn't really want the stones. Therefore, it could be he doesn't, and that's why he would not have a kinyan on the stones. And we go into the final case of the Mishnah, 5 lines from the wide lines. And the question is, this last case is really kemat, almost perfectly identical to the previous case, to the case that we just discussed of clearing away the stones in the wall. And then we speak about paying the wheat instead of his actual cash. So why did the Mishnah have to say the same case 2 times? Usricha. If we only said the first case about the wall, I would have thought when the owner of the wall says to him, take the stones, we don't listen to him. Why? Because the garden guy has no way to get payment from him. The stones are not being given to him for any payment of anything, so why should he accept them? But in the second case of the workers, he owes this worker money and now he's offering to pay him with the wheat. I would think maybe you have to accept it. Because people say, when you're in debt, collect anything. So maybe, because the worker wants to get paid, maybe I would think that he should, yes, accept even the wheat. If we only said the case of the worker with the wheat, I would have thought, once he accepted, we don't listen to him. He has a claim to him of cash. He worked for him. Therefore, we had to list both cases. We continue on the third medium-sized line. Ein shaimim loy. If he offers to give him straw, he doesn't have to listen to him. Asks the Gemara, Vatanya shaimim loy. There's a brisa that says that he does have to listen to him. That the worker could be forced to take even straw as payment. Amram nachal lokasha kan b'shaloi kan b'shal chaveroi. Our Mishnah, which he said that he could demand being paid in cash, is where the straw is in the owner's property. Where the Brisa says that he does not have to accept it, is where it's in someone else's property. Meaning, if the one who's hiring this worker is the one benefiting, then he has to pay cash. But if it's someone else's property, then he does not. Says the Gemara, Amrlei, Rabba Rav Nachman b'shaloi ma'itayma. What's the reason why when it's in this employer, this owner's own possession, you have to pay him cash? Amrlei agralach, that you are obligated to pay me. B'shal chaver nami, says Gemara, scharei alav. The Tanya says b'al lasus b'shaloi v'rab b'shal chaverei. Nice l'schar mishalem. V'chazin atav b'ais. You have to pay him straight up. Mashenu, and then he can go collect from the other guy. So why should it be any difference in our case? Says the Gemara, right? Elam Rav Nachman, a new way of explaining our Mishnah. That when it's hefker, that's when you could force him to take from the wheat, but when it's in his own house, you cannot. Asa Rav Nachman, Rav is not happy. Metziah is payalatzman. The Metziah of a worker keeps himself. He must say he's not sharmin balabayis. When he hired him to weed or to shovel, then the Metziah goes to the balabayis. When he's hired to do just general work, then everything goes to the balabayis. So therefore, if he's being hired for the specific purpose of the tevin, of the straw, then the straw should become the owner's. The straw should become the owner. Why? Because he's the one benefiting. He's hiring particularly for that person. And therefore, the worker should be able to say, I want to get paid cash. Says the Gemara, Elam Rav Nachman, you're right. A third way of explaining the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says he has to be paid in cash is when he lifted up the items on behalf of the owner, so he had a kinyan. Kan b'habata, the Brisa says the worker can be told to take straws, where the job that he is just to watch. He's not actually picking up the stuff. When he picks it up and makes a kinyan for the owner, then he's responsible, obligated to pay him cash. If he didn't actually pick him up and make a kinyan for the owner, then the owner could push him off and pay him with straw. Says the Gemara, now that you mentioned this habata, Amar Rabba, habata behefker tanahi. If someone gazes, if someone looks at ownerless property, are you able to make a kinyan with merely habata? Says the Gemara's Machlekes Tanayim. Did Tanah we learned in the Mishnah Shomrei Svichei Shviyis, those who watch the aftergrowths of Shemitah, Noitlin Scharam Mitchumas Alishka. Rav Yosi Amaroitzim Misnadev who says Rav Yosi, if he wants, he can volunteer and watch it b'shem rechinam for free. Amr Loi, the Rabbanan said to Rav Yosi, Ata Aimer Kain, if you say that they're not paid, Ein Bayin Mishel Tzibur, then it's not going to be considered coming from the community. What does that mean? It's not going to be considered that the wheat is owned by the tzibur. Says Gemara, my love, what's this machlokes Tanakama and Rav Yosi? The Tanakama is about to have Kani. The Tanakama holds that merely habata will make a kinyan, and now the wheat is not going to be owned by the tzibur unless he's being paid for his work. Then great, he's working on behalf of the tzibur, then the tzibur is kainet. Rav Yosi said about to have gerloi kani, and therefore v'chasli tzibur ma'isi ashu dekozachi bei. When the tzibur brings it, ma'isi they make a kinyan umata. When the tzibur brings it, that's where they make a kinyan. Says the Gemara, Umay ata oimer. And what does it mean when the Rabbanan said to Rav Yosi, if you say that it's not going to be coming from the tzibur, midvarecha lidvareinu. If we say what you say, Rav Yosi, that the watchman is not paid, according to what we hold that he has a kinyan, why? Because he will have a kinyan, therefore will not be considered that the carbon is coming from the tzibur unless we pay him. Says the Gemara, that's one way of learning the machlokes Rav Yosi and the Chachamim, that it's going to center around whether habata behefker is kaina. Amar Rava loy, the kuliyal habata behefker kani. Says Rava, 4 lines from the white lines. Everyone's going to agree that habata, looking at hefker, is a yes and kini. V'chichayshinan shemliim serem yafa yafa, and the chash over here is that the watchman will yes have a kinyan, and he might not give it back to the tzibur wholeheartedly kamifli. That's the machlekes. We pay him. And if not, we don't pay him. We have to be worried. Maybe he's going to have a kinyan in his stuff, and he's not going to give it over wholeheartedly, and now the tzibur doesn't have the appropriate stuff for the carbon. Rav Yosi said, we're not worried about that. What does it mean that Chum said to Rav Yosi ata omer hachi kamerle mitvarecha lidvareinu chayshin shamlim so yafa yafa, have to worry not give yafa yafa, and then it's going to come out that the carbon omer is not coming from Mitzal Tzibur because he might not give it over yafa yafa if you don't actually pay him for his work. Continues the Gemara Ikit Yamri on the first very wide line, another way of learning the aforementioned machlekes. Rava Amar Tukulim, that's a life cutting. Mamish the exact opposite. Not that Rava comes along and it says everyone agrees that Abatab Hefker, looking at Hefker is yes a kinyan. Hafoch. That Rava says everyone agrees that Abatab Hefker is not a kinyan. What's the machlekes? Are we chayshesh for Bali Zrais, one that takes things by force? The Tanakama Savar, the Takin Rabban Lamesle Arba Zuzei, says the Tanakama, the Chachamim made a taikana that Hektish pays the watchman for Zos, Bali Zrais. Why? So that the Bali Zrais, the strong people, will hear that the stuff belongs to the Beis HaMikdash, and they're not going to get involved. Rabbi Yosi Savar Laitakinu, there's no taikana. We turn over to Kuf Yud Chesem and Beis. Umata Imer Hachi Kamerle Mitvarechal is very no Imam Shal Sibar V'Chen Ki At Asurav and Rav Yechel Cheshin Bal Yisrael Ikbei Nayu. So another way of learning is has to do with Ari Cheshin Bal Yisrael, and we have to make a takana to ensure that they will not grab hold of this stuff, thereby disallowing the carbon tzibur from being effective of the Shtei Halechem. Continue with the Mishnah, 4 lines down. Kuf Yichas Amid Beis Says the Mishnah Maitzi Zevel or Shusarabim. Someone brings out his manure, his fertilizer, Shusarabim. Ha Maitzi. Once he puts it out, Ramazavel Mizavel. And the one who fertilizes takes it and fertilizes his field with it. Meaning you do not leave the Zevel in the street. Ein Sharon Tit Shusarabim. You're not allowed to sow clay in Rosh Hashanah. You're not allowed to make bricks. Aval Koivlin Tit Rosh Hashanah. We're allowed to need clay in Rosh Hashanah to use right away for building. Avalei Leveinim, but you're not allowed to use it to make bricks. Habayne Rosh Hashanah. So when I build in Rosh Hashanah, maybe Avanim, maybe if you want to bring stones, you could. Vabayne Bayne. V'mhezik, then of course Mishal Mashazik. Rashba Goimer says Shimon Gamliel Af Metakin Hu Es Malachta Lefnei Shleishim Yom. You let it prepare your work for up to 30 days, which would mean storing materials in the public property is allowed for up to 30 days prior to when the building projects begin. So says the Gemara, the beginning of the Mishnah gives over a very simple din, that one is not allowed to leave his Zevel in Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara, Lema Sisa like Rav Yehuda. This seemingly is not like Shita's Rav Yehuda. Why? In the first one line, the Tanya teaches the Braisa. Rav Yehuda Aimer says Rav Yehuda, when it's the time that one is normal to bring out his zevel, his fertilizer, you're allowed to. And you pile up every 30 days, so that as people walk by, they crush the zevel by them and by their animals' feet. Why? Why are they allowed to do this? Says Rabbi Yehuda. This was one of the underpinnings of Yeshua allocating the land to Eretz Yisrael. A Tanai that they're allowed to leave the Zevel for the betterment of all the people in Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara, so seemingly is at odds Yeshua Yisrael's Aretz with our Mishnah. It seemingly said it's not allowed. Says the Gemara, I feel Tamer Rabbi Yehuda. No, we could fit, Rav Yehuda into our Mishnah. Moed Rav Yehuda, Shem Hezik, Chayev L'Shalem. Rav Yehuda says you're allowed to do it. It's a Tanai. But Rav Yehuda also agrees that if it then goes and does damage, you are obligated to pay. Ve'atanan, ask the Gemara 1 second. Moed Rav Yehuda ben Chanukah, Shehu Pater. Rav Yehuda was Maida with Ner Chanukah, that if you left in the Rashid it does damage, that you're Pater. Mimneshu Aiser Rishos. My lav Rishos Bezdin. And therefore in our case, if he also has Rishos, he should be allowed to, he should not be obligated to pay if it does damage. Answers the Gemara, no, it doesn't mean Rishos Bezdin. Loi Rishos de Mitzvah. Now what does it mean by Ner Chanukah? That you put it out for Rishos? What does it mean that Rav Yehuda says you're Pater? Not because Bez didn't let you put it out, because it's a mitzvah, and that's why you're Pater. But in our case, if Bez were to let you put it out, then it would be a different story. Vatanya says the Gemara, I'll bring you a raya. Kalei l'shamar mutar l'kagu shesarabim. Em hezek chayev l'shalem. Rav Yehuda says no, that if you're allowed to put it out, you're a Pater. Says the Gemara, you're right. Al machmarta mas nisan. To like Rav Yehuda, we have to say that the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Abaye. Now that we learned that Rav Yehuda holds that you're allowed to bring out your zevel to Shesarabim. Our Mishnah holds you're not allowed to bring out your zevel to Shesarabim. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, Rav Yehuda, Rav Shimon, Gamliel, Rav Shimon, Kulus, Firlu, Kol Makish, and Atzul, Chachamim, Rishos, Vezik, Pater. A cloud that whenever Chazal allowed you to do something, if eventually that which you did causes damage, you are Pater. 8 lines from the Mishnah at the end of Kufi Chesem Beis explains the Gemara, Rav Yehuda, Hadamaran, Rashbag, Ditanan, Rav Shimon Gamliel, Meraf Metakin, who has Malachtal of Neishleishim Yoim. Shimon Gamliel says, one may even be prepared by storing materials for 30 days before he uses them. So we see that he allows you to put into their sheet. Rav Shimon did tanan. If someone puts an oven in an upper story of a house, he has to put a layer of plaster underneath it for 3 tfachim. Ubekira, a type of oven, tefach. But even though you're allowed to put your oven there, so says the Gemara, whereas Rav Shimon Aimer lo yamar and kol shum alalu el shemizik pater milisham. That's Rav Shimon, Rav Shmag, and Rav Yehuda, that once Chazal allow you to do something, you're pater if it causes damage. Tana Rabbanan, and we'll conclude today's share with this: if someone gave over stones to acquirer to cut the stones, asatos chayiv. The stone cutter is chayiv if any damage happens to the stone. Asatos shemasar lechamar. Now, when the stone cutter gives over the stones to the donkey driver, a chamar chayiv. Chamar shenasar lekatov, who is a porter who carries the stuff, a katov chayiv. A katov shemasar lebanoi, to the builder, habanoi chayiv. Habanoi shemasar leadrichol, to the contractor, hadrichol chayiv. V'mhiniach even ala dimos. But once the stones are placed on the row of stones, meaning built into the building, v'zikan kulan chayav l'shalem. Now everyone is obligated. V'atani, we learned in the Raisa achron chayiv v'kulan p'turin. So why are you telling me once it's built into the building, everyone is chayiv? Says the Gemara, loy kasha kan beschiros kan bekablonis. The second bracelet says that they're not all chayiv, only the master bricklayer, the drichel is chayiv, is when it's schiros, and therefore every worker is responsible just what he does. The first price that says that they're all chayiv is bikablanas, when they're hired together under one contract, and therefore they're all obligated for the general building, and that's the reason why once the brick is laid, they will all assume responsibility. We'll pick it up from the Mishnah and finish the Masechta on the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.